That said, we cruise right through it, April. So if you are primed and ready to go.
Perfect. I think it's going to be fantastic. Without further ado, let me share my screen. All right. So that's me. So for those of you that do not know me, I am April Zilg and I'm a professional paddler. And I just want to start by saying thank you so much for having me as your speaker. It is truly an honor and something that I love to do. In grade school, very long ago, my report cards always said that little April doesn't know how to be quiet in class. And looking back on that motivates me even more to cultivate my speaking, because they say that the things that you're drawn to are no accident. So opportunities such as this one are much appreciated. The hard part is probably going to be getting me to shut up. So a little bit about myself. I was a marine biologist in my past life, and I had a job nonetheless. It's almost like a unicorn. I worked in a lab with no windows, and I stared at a computer screen for 8 to 10 hours a day. I got very seasick on research cruises. Believe it or not, I hated being out in the ocean, and we killed a lot of animals in the name of science. We saw things going on after the deep sea horizon oil spill that we weren't allowed to talk about or report on because of where our funding was coming from. That kind of exacerbated this awful feeling that I had at this job. And I had gotten sick while working here. I was eating a ton of processed food, working long hours, drinking pretty heavily on the weekends, in addition to having like a daily alcohol relaxing beverage when I got home. I was really unhappy. And for about 4 years, my life was incredibly inflammatory. I had a kind of a wake up moment and I decided to get healthy. And so what do I do when I decide that I want to do something? I read a book and then I read another book and I started exercising and eating much better. And it was during this time that I found stand-up paddling. Specifically, I had tried kayaking, but the boats were really heavy. And I don't know, there's something about it. But the day I tried stand-up, I knew. And so I'm paddling and my brain was kind of working better. My mood had improved and I felt amazing, but there was still that pesky job, right? In 2012, I got the opportunity to abscond to India with who is now my husband. And my boss said not to do it. I was committing career suicide, but you know, life is short, take chances. So there I am the week I moved to India for 14 months. I lived in a surfing ashram for just a little bit, and that's where I met Tanvi Jagadish. So Tanvi is one of the small girls in the middle of that photo. For those of you that don't know her, she is a paddling inspiration all her own. I wish I had an entire hour just to talk about her. But she decided that she wanted to be a surfer and open a stand-up paddleboard school in India against her parents' wishes and against cultural wishes, where they look down upon women because they become more tan if they're out in the sun. And, you know, when her mom said, "Who will marry you?" she said, "I'll just marry a surfer." And she was able to represent India in the ISA competition in Fiji, and now she's running her school and she's just doing an amazing job. So that's kind of actually the highlight of my entire India days. Not even the fact that I set a world record for the highest altitude stand-up paddled. We were in the Limca Book of World Records. So if you look up that world record, it's fun. They don't drink Guinness over there. They drink a lime soda called Limca. And if you go by population numbers, my world record's like, I don't know, a lot of people read that, but they're all in India. On my way home from India, I took the time to stand up paddle in the Maldives, in Sri Lanka, Thailand, Bali, Indonesia, Fiji, Hawaii, where this is a clinic with Jeremy Riggs, by the way. I highly recommend if you can ever get out and work with him. His downwind clinics are just absolutely life-changing. So it was a heck of a trip, to say the least. And I am very grateful to have paddled in these amazing places and lived like so fully. And that's why when people ask me these days, are you afraid of sharks? I say, no, I've had a pretty good run. But so but people don't like that answer at all. So especially my mother. So I usually retract that statement and say, no, I'm not afraid of sharks, because if you get attacked, you just booger them. And this is a horrible joke, because for those of you that know, boogering, you just take your thumb and shove it into the attacker's eye socket. TMI, I know. Works on sharks, alligators, and male assailants. Anyway, anywho, that's where I've been. Let's talk about where I am, and which is why I get calls sometimes to give talks like this one. I worked at Carolina Paddleboard Company for about 3 years when I returned from India. So I do know a lot about paddleboard shapes, sizes, all the paddles, volumes, and how to pair people with their best board. Like, what board do these people need? I gave lessons on technique and training. And it was around this time that I really started pursuing competitive paddling and riding for Hobie stand-up paddleboards. I was, as I said, at that shop for 3 years before leaving for California. And it wasn't after 2 years that when I moved to California that I started seeing some of the results from all of my years of training. And so I hope by the end of this talk, you'll understand why it took so long. But if you've ever heard of this bamboo plant, which is on the screen right now, this Chinese bamboo takes 5 years of watering and fertilizing while it remains dormant underground, doing nothing. So you just have to trust and keep watering it and fertilizing. You see nothing. And then all of a sudden, 5 years later, it erupts from the ground and grows 90 feet tall in the matter of like a couple of weeks. So my training was a lot like that. I had a really, really good 2019 season. I did a 100-mile race, did a lot of OC6, Gorge Downwind Champs, US stuff, Gorge, everything. To say the least, like I said, it was a good year. I was on contract with the APP World Tour, and race winnings are nice, but they don't pay the bills, nor does it really cover the cost to be an international racer. Which brings me to one of the questions that you guys had sent over, and a little backstory. Up until 2019, I did offer paddle coaching one-on-one on the side, and that enabled me to keep doing what I love to do, which is paddle and race. But that year, you guys might have heard of Jennifer Fratsky. She had the crazy idea for us to do the Yukon 1000. My husband kind of volunteered me to do it with her. I said yes. You guys can actually follow along on these adventures. I think we've got 5 episodes up thus far. We haven't obviously done the Yukon 1000 because it has been postponed, and it may even be postponed again. But we are tracking the journey and the road to the Yukon 1000 on the Puake Designs YouTube channel. And in ramping up to do a race of that magnitude and be somewhat competitive, the volume and the amount of time I've had to dedicate to training, it really didn't give me a lot of extra time to dedicate to my one-on-one clients and do the programming. And I wanted to give them something where they could get similar programming with less involvement from me, but at a fraction of the cost. So I decided to go kind of like, I guess, group-based online. My friend had developed a software to deliver training plans, and I didn't really think I had enough clout on my own, and I wanted some other pretty faces and solid coaching experience to help draw in more clients. So I approached my co-founders with the online platform, and luckily everyone said yes. So for the person that asked what my involvement was with Paddle Ninja, I'm equal owner with these 3 jokers, and we kind of just split it 4 ways. Danny and Johnny offer a lot of programming. I build programming as well. I currently answer most of the emails and the forum questions. And Paulo's really excellent at dragon boat, and he's a really, really good technical stroke coach and very excellent at video analysis. So I'm happy to be with those guys. So enough about me. Let's talk about training and dive into some of the questions that you guys had sent. Paddle training is really just life training, I think. I think every time you talk about paddle training, you could replace the word paddle with life, and you'd come out with a very similar MO, life goal, life theme. So today, for the entire talk, what we're going to do, the way this is going to be structured, is we're going to zoom out, and I'm going to answer the questions that you guys sent that kind of apply to training sustainably and training across a very long period of time, say like 2 to 5 years and maybe even beyond. And after that, we're going to zoom into an annual view. And once we talk about more specific training within the year, we're gonna talk about race strategy and race technique specifically. So if anybody has a piece of paper near them right now, what I want you to do, or you can keep it in your head, but wouldn't be bad to have a memento. If you have a piece of paper, I want you to think of a goal that you have in stand-up paddling, in whatever craft you paddle. I want you to think of one of your biggest paddling goals, and I want you to write it down. And then I don't want you to just write down this single goal. I want you to break it down into a gold, a silver, and a bronze goal. So the gold goal is the best possible outcome, and it's a stretch. But you know, if you did absolutely everything right and perfect and you're at your best, it's totally doable. Your silver goal is still pretty friggin' amazing. You're proud, but a few blunders are allowed. And bronze, pretty achievable, but a challenge. So it could be a race, it could be a pace, it could be a buoy turn. Whatever it is, I want you to write it down. And if you'd like, you can share it in the Zoom comments. I would love to see what some of the people, like some of you guys' goals are. I love goals and I love goal setting. I'm a nerd like that. So yeah, share with me those. We'll read through them later. So like I said, we'll look at those goals in the view of annual training and off season. A lot of you guys had tons of questions about off season, which is a more broad preparation. And then we'll talk about that competition season, the more specific preparation, followed by those very specific race day questions. Life and training isn't always rainbows and butterflies. A lot of people ask me how I keep my motivation personally high across multiple years. It's not necessarily magic, maybe a little, but it is life balance and it's training balance, especially when there's forced time off. So you guys had asked how to do mental upkeep through times when normal amount of paddling isn't possible. Who here has a to-do list? Like I do. I have a pretty long to-do list, a few projects that I would love to get around to at some point. Something I have found to be insanely important when it comes to an unplanned break, such as an injury, or if you can't get to the water due to COVID, is keeping to a schedule. So take your paddle time or take your gym time and do something constructive with it. If it's your normal gym block and you can't go to a gym, start a home workout routine. If you're injured, and you could clean up your home gym, and in either scenario, you could start a home gym by picking up some bands, a couple of dumbbells, making your own. Just kind of get creative. And if you have a garden to weed or maintain, you could do some gardening. If there's a room in your house you want to paint it, but use your lats. There's a ton of very, very creative ways that you can set your mind to do your to-do list, to do your task, to clean your refrigerator. Anything it is that you want to do, you can do it with like a paddling mindset where you're visualizing paddling, you're visualizing racing. And we'll talk a little bit more about visualization later. but just staying constructive, because mood follows action is one of the best things you can do to stay motivated. Whatever you're doing, it's still training. Just like the Karate Kid waxing the car, if you do it mindfully, it can be training. Even just learning how to focus on whatever task that you're doing, focus without distraction, maybe turning off your phone, to follow through on a task that you said you're going to do, to have that discipline to start and come back to it day after day, to set intention. Those are all skills that you need to do paddle training as well and be successful at that. So those are skills that you're developing even with mundane tasks. So some other factors to consider keeping you guys' big goal that you've written down or have in your mind. When you're forced off the water for injury or something like COVID, what necessarily is it that you're stressing out about? When is your goal due? Like, when is it? Is there a time date like for your goal that you're feeling some anxiety that you're not able to get to it? Or is there just like some race that isn't as big a deal, and for some reason you're stressing about that, or you're stressing about getting to the water? So keep that in mind. And if you're stressing over anything that puts that bigger goal that you just wrote down on paper at risk, you just want to scrap it. So now, with your big goal on that piece of paper, I want you guys to write a couple of mental skills that you're going to need to achieve that goal. And if you'd like to share a couple in the comments, please do. We'll come back and look at those as well. Discipline is probably one of them. What about, you guys might want to think things like breath control, visualization. I had mentioned focus earlier. So mental skills, not necessarily physical skills that you gain while paddling, but things that can be achieved with seemingly monotonous tasks or gentle activity. And then the further you are away from your goal, the broader your preparations can be. So the key here is to definitely not stress out, be gentle with yourself, and use your time constructively. Now, as the event draws closer, or your goal gets closer in time to where you are, and for whatever reason you can't get to the water, or whatever specific training that you need for said goal, you want to make sure that you're using visualizing more than anything else. And with a healthy dose of cross training that utilizes the specific muscle groups that you're going to be using for your goal, and plenty of aerobic work that includes a decent amount at your target heart rate for that paddle event, or whatever the goal may be. So what does visualization look like? I want to talk a little bit more about that before we move along. It's not saying, oh, I got to beat Betty, I got to beat Bo. A lot of people approach like a goal or something in paddling where they're competitive with someone else. You can visualize yourself beating somebody else all day, but that won't help if you're forced off the water and you're relying on visualization. So visualization looks like seeing yourself paddling, closing your eyes, and you can run through a few scenarios that you think you might run into, but for the most part, it's when you close your eyes, you feel your stroke rate, you see yourself getting a solid catch, and you see your muscles activating. How much pressure do you need to apply to that blade per stroke? What is your stroke rate? How fast is your recovery? All of those things that you have control over. Don't visualize anything you don't have control over. And all the studies, I can share them. They're all on my blog. I love this stuff. When you visualize yourself doing an activity, it fires the same neurological pathways as if you're actually doing that activity. So if you have a strong base of paddling, then you can rely on visualization. I know one of my Paddle Ninja members, Bill, he had some finger surgery out of nowhere right before the Alabama 650, and he was unable to get on the water for, I think, the last month or two before that race. And so he was just on a paddle plan of like walking and light jogging and visualization for technique. And he had a really great race. When we talk about visualization too, this is where you have to have a really good grasp on how you're measuring your success and the milestones that are important en route to your goal. As I mentioned before, it can't be a moving target like I got to beat Betty and Bo. It's stroke rate, it's power, it's pressure, it's heart rate. Those are the things you're visualizing. And by keeping a focus on your big goal at all times and having ways to measure progress, like no matter what you did. So for me, to give you guys kind of a concrete example, for me, a long road trip, I might turn off the radio and sit in boredom for many, many hours so that prepares me for being out on the Yukon for Yukon 1000. It's cold and it's winter time here right now. I start a fire every night and I see how fast I can start the fire, because if I want to start a fire during the Yukon race, I want to start it really fast, get warm, cook some food, and then go to bed even faster so that I can rest more quickly and have more time sleeping and therefore a better race. So that's how you can turn seemingly silly things that you're doing into actual training and visualization. So on you guys' scrap pieces of paper or on your goal paper, I want you to write down now some measurable components that are related to your goal. What's something that you could measure along the path to your goal? Is it a stroke rate for an amount of time? Is it walking on your board en route to the buoy turn? So improved catch, better aerobic fitness, top end speed, and maybe even like lactate resistance, lactate buffering. Take a minute, write those things down if you want to for your goal. So we just want that goal to be measurable. And a last note, here's some not so common things that, you know, like I'm working on or that you could work on that are somewhat measurable. Calm reactions. That's something you can practice every day, is not overreacting when something doesn't go your way. And that helps a lot on race day, by the way, or in the race. If something's not going the way you want it to, if you constantly cultivate having a calm reaction and things rolling off your back, then that's going to be your default action when something doesn't go your way necessarily during a race. And as I mentioned, finally, the more you stress about being forced off the water, be it COVID, be it injury, whatever it is, if you're stressing, it's going to detract from your performance. So always relax, always visualize, and trust in whatever previous training that you're coming off of. Some other factors to consider when you are forced off the water, maybe due to injury. If it's an unplanned injury break, what caused your injury? So remember, we're still zoomed out. We're looking at a multi-year level across a broader amount of time. So depending on what caused your injury, you might need to take a little bit more time off than you think. Don't rush back if you have the time. You might even have to take a step backwards to move forward more productively. For example, my initial battle with aerobic deficiency syndrome was a lot like this, where I had maxed out how well I could ever perform with my anaerobic system. And without going back to the basics of putting in long, easy aerobic miles and developing my aerobic capacity, I was never going to get to the next level. So if you have time off, use that time initially in your schedule to sit and really focus and think. What caused this injury? If it's an overuse injury, you need to maybe take a step back and look at things like life stress and cortisol, your sleep habits, nutrition, your training intensity, muscular imbalance. Those are just a few things to start with. From there, you can start formulating a plan for your comeback. Other times it's an acute or traumatic injury, like you fell off of something and broke your leg. For these times, you have to learn how to pivot, and you might need to work out a different part of your body or find a different craft. Just pivot and get creative. Gentle movement and mobility, anything that gets your blood flowing to enhance recovery. Your body needs to get the signal that it is needed. If you lie around in front of your TV, you're not sending your body the right signal, and your fitness and your recovery are both going to suffer. So there were multiple questions about fitness through injury. So I'd like to elaborate that on a little bit more. And the first thing I want to talk about is in my off season, I'm working very, very hard to prevent injuries. So if the previous season revealed like a tweak or a twinge or anything that feels off, then I'm using my off season to work backwards and find out which muscles, which ligaments, which tendons, which parts of me are related and attached, what is involved in this ache, in this pain, or this overuse injury. And from there, I can strengthen the muscles, the ligaments, the tendons that surround that muscle. It's supporting musculature. Quick Google searches and whatnot they'll help you find stuff like that, as well as a trained physical therapist. So by strengthening it, you can prevent it from even coming back. Secondarily, when I am healthy and capable of training, I don't miss sessions. That way, when I am forced off the water, I have a huge base supporting me, and a week or two here and there don't ever take that big base of work away from me. And that attitude alone, that confidence of knowing that I have that base of training, really lends itself to success. And finally, every injury is an opportunity if you have a growth mindset. A broken foot, can't sup? Try outrigger canoe. A broken arm, can't paddle? Take up hiking or trail running. There are many, many disabled athletes that give their best and work their hardest each and every day that don't come up with a lot of excuses. So if you can't find a way to get creative and constructively work towards your goal, then you might just have to accept that that goal isn't that important to you. And there is nothing wrong with that either. Just be honest with yourself, because that's stressful if you're not. So on that note, let's look back on our individual goals on your pieces of paper and brainstorm for a minute. If COVID, if injury, if whatever in life happens to you, is your goal still achievable? Are you able to pivot? Do you still want it? Do you still want to achieve it? And it's okay if at this moment you say, oh man, well, if I'm forced off the water for this amount of time, that goal doesn't really work for me anymore. That's okay. You can pivot and set a new goal. You can modify the existing goal. Do you need to cultivate a growth mindset maybe to achieve that goal, to get more creative? Do you need to take a few steps backwards right now at the tail end of COVID, while people still have somewhat of time off, like things aren't coming back as quickly before everything starts ramping up? Should you take time now to put yourself in a better position to achieve your goal later? Do you have discipline to work on the boring stuff that you might not want to work on? And to this, I would write down some other ideas on that paper. So not just, if that goal is achievable, but write down some ideas on your goal paper of some focused action that you could take to make your goal more achievable. So on to some other questions, but while you guys are writing some of that fun stuff, somebody asked, how much of a break from your board do you take in the off season to recuperate mentally and physically? I take at least 1 month off from structured training, and that doesn't mean that I won't take my dog for a leisurely loop around the harbor or the cove. And during this time, I definitely work on mobility. I do physically demanding tasks still, but I don't stick to any schedule. I also don't follow any nutrition during this time. One of the hardest things I find for me as a female athlete is eating enough food. To force myself daily to eat enough calories to recover from the training that I do it's exhausting. I feel uncomfortably full, I feel gross, but if I don't do it, I will get overtrained, I will get sick, and I will not be able to keep up with my training volumes and my performances. So when off season comes, I don't eat very much. I eat less, but I eat worse things too. I eat more cookies than I should. Oddly enough, I reduce the overall caloric intake, but I gain a few pounds because of the quality. But I paddle, I surf, I hike. I do what I want activity wise. I go out and plant things in my garden because I'm trying to make a food forest. I just do anything that makes my life feel more fulfilling. And like I said, it's more of a mental break for me than anything else. It's a break from the discipline. So they said, what does your year-round flexibility and balance work look like? I realized that the person who sent this question over probably means physical flexibility and balance, although we just talked about being flexible with your schedule if forced off the water. And balance, I like to balance my life by having active and wholesome hobbies that support an active brain, body, and lifestyle. I do yoga every single day, except in the off season. If I don't feel like it, I'll skip a day or 5. And alongside the crossover symmetry shoulder activation system, that's what I use to do muscular balance in the top half of my body. So when I talk about muscular balance, this is where in my off season and even into the on season, I'm making sure that my body is balanced in every plane of motion. And then also, so from top to bottom, left to right, front to back, push and pull in each of those different planes. So a friend of mine is actually doing a thesis on muscular balance in this manner. And in the preliminary studies, it's the #1 determinant of injury prevention. So the more balanced you are in these planes of movement, then the less likely you are to get one of those overuse injuries or tweaks. So what causes an injury such as that is when your body is out of balance and like your push is stronger than your pull in one of these planes. So you go to do something like take a hard stroke, or you brace because you're about to fall. And it's because one side's stronger than the other, it pulls it pulls your like musculoskeletal system out of alignment. And that's why you're injured and off the water. Not to mention muscle balance improves your actual balance when on an unstable surface, which I realize that whoever asked that question about year-round flexibility and balance, aside from yoga, my flexibility, I do not train my balance outside of paddling in choppy water, the choppiest I can possibly find. There isn't a consumer product on the market for balance, in my opinion, that can train you for stand-up paddling, period. All at-home balance-based systems are reacting to your movements. They are very learnable, and they're anticipated. Like they're easily anticipated. For example, like you lean on your left foot and you counter with a core on this side, whereas Mother Nature has her own dance. It's haphazard, it's random, and it can't ever really be learned or anticipated the way an at-home balance thing can. It's more about learning to flow with the ocean versus the balance boards, I think are just, I don't know. I'm not a fan. So on that note, I want you to think back to your goals that you guys have written down. And for me, if it's a race like Red Bull Heavy Water or a big channel crossing or a choppy ocean race, but I don't live near conditions like that, is my goal realistic? So if I never, ever practiced for Red Bull Heavy Water, if my goal was to win Red Bull Heavy Water, that would not be realistic. Moreover, I couldn't even begin to visualize it when I was taking time for visualization training leading up to the event. So now we're going to talk about training within a year, not across multiple years. But before we do that, I will say for long-term success across many, many years of training, the bottom line is that you have to have a healthy relationship with your training and with your racing. You have to be flexible. If you don't train sustainably, we'll talk about what that looks like in a minute, or with a proper plan and with a clear goal. The goal is what's going to keep you focused and it's going to prevent burnout. So, off-season best practices. I had a couple of questions about that. So, after coming back from a planned break, so now we're not talking about COVID or injury, we're talking about in the normal annual cycle of things, we had an off season. We're coming back, we're gearing up for next season. You want to do the first couple of weeks of anatomical adaptation. So during this time, you're really gentle with yourself about getting back into your groove. It's a good time to start adding in any new moves or something you wanted to work on, any new training modalities. And you're going to ramp up your training volume from being off season to being on season. So, you know, if your full workout, like the full Monty calls for 5 to 7 workouts a week, you know, week 1, you did like 2 to 4 workouts. And then the next week you did 4 to 6. And then the third week, you kind of got up to that, your regular intensity. So give yourself a buffer. Give yourself a couple of weeks for anatomical adaptation, ramp up that training volume, and it's okay to miss as long as you're moving your body and gently and easing into things, not being too strict with yourself yet. And around this time, if you do follow a strict nutrition plan, it's time to start getting back into that as well. After you're done with a couple of weeks, like you get back to where you need to be. This can last different lengths of time for different people. But when you feel like you're ready for like training, your first real kind of modality is going to be the maximum strength phase. And that's about 6 weeks long. And that's where you develop that proper push and pull balance in all the different planes of motion that I was talking about. And that type of training pairs excellently with aerobic capacity. So the reason they pair well together, maximum strength keeps its maximal neural recruitment, develop strength. You're not going to lose any speed. You're not going to lose power. You're actually building strength and power. And aerobic capacity is long, slow, easy work. Actually, you want to make sure that the aerobic capacity work is below your aerobic threshold. So this is something that if you can ever get it tested in a lab, it is more accurate. The finger prick lactate tests are a great way to do that. But if you don't, you're going to take 180 minus your age. And everybody's going to go, holy crap, that's really low. Yes, it is. And so training at that intensity alongside lifting heavier weights. And when I say heavy weights, it's heavy for you. Don't look at anybody else. They're as a percentage of like your maximum, as long as you're maximizing your neural recruitment, like how many muscle fibers you have to recruit to move the weight, then that is the proper weight for you. It doesn't have to be heavy. It just has to elicit that kind of response. As I mentioned, these go really well with the aerobic heart rate work, because the aerobic capacity work flushes any waste that you and soreness that you might be developing during the maximum strength work. So then you guys asked how much of your pre-season paddling is done in a base building aerobic zone, and do I use a heart rate monitor? You can probably tell because I mentioned the 180 minus my age thing. I absolutely use a heart rate monitor, but only to keep myself from going too high of a heart rate. I build my entire training season, so after the anatomical adaptation phase, from maximum strength phase all the way on to my pre-competitive and pre-competitive phase. I use the 80-20 principle. I highly recommend the book by Matt Fitzgerald of that name if you are into reading, but I do it kind of on that zoomed out macro scale. And most of my preseason, so again, during the max strength phase and even during my max power and my aerobic power phases, a lot of that work is aerobic. It starts out low aerobic and then it gets kind of high end aerobic. And then it isn't until the end. So the first 4 months of my training, for example, 80% of my work is going to be aerobic base building. And then as you get closer to the event, the total volume drops, but the intensity comes up. And that's the 20% anaerobic work. So 80% aerobic, 20% above, so anaerobic and higher intensity work. And once you get close to the race, that's how you peak. And the intensity of that 20% is dependent on your goal race. So if your goal race is a 70-mile race or a 100-mile race, that high intensity isn't going to actually be that high intensity. You'll probably do less super high intensity. You'll do slightly over aerobic threshold work because you want to be able to like come above and below that threshold and your body adapt well to it. And you'll do minimal work where you're kind of all out sprinting for things like catching a draft train, dropping a draft train, catching a bump. So all of that stuff that you want to be able to do. And personally, buoy turns. For me, buoy turns really get my heart rate thumping. So I reserve those for the 20% of anaerobic work. So one amazing thing about spending a lot of time, 80% to be exact, a lot of time developing one's aerobic capacity is that you have a lot of time to really focus on your technique. You can bulletproof your technique in this time. You're going to bulletproof your stroke. Early season work is not boring if you're really using it to work on technique and your stroke. Early on in your base season, it's okay to paddle in whatever you have access to. Granted, if you do have access to conditions that will mimic your race, I would highly recommend paddling in them as frequently as you can. But if you are not close to conditions like that, it is a-okay just to get your base work in. As I said, and let me even step back for a second. If you are training in conditions, but you're in your base season, and every time you go out, like if it's choppy and that gets your heart rate up and it shoots out of your aerobic zone, you need to find some calmer water to train in because you have to stay in that aerobic zone. And we will talk a little bit more about why that zone is so important later. So timing. So from progression from our off season to our competitive season or our goal, I want you guys to get your goal papers back out and write down when is your goal. So your goal needs to have a time. It's not in your base season, obviously, or I mean, maybe it is, it can be. But then what are you training for? So add a date, add a time, add a deadline of sorts to your goal papers. And if your race is a year from now, for example, you can set a goal each month that's going to get you closer to your goal. If your goal is a buoy turn, if it's something as simple as doing a good buoy turn, and set a goal 6 months from now, I'm going to do a buoy turn. Then month 1, practice walking the board. Month 2, walk the board and turn it 180. Month 3, walk the board and turn it 180 while moving. Month 4, walk the board. You get the point. Each month, break your goal down into small digestible steps and attack one per month and make your way towards your goal. That is another amazing aspect of the base season, of looking at your training from an annual perspective and setting that goal. Have a plan, set a time, and it could be something you start now. It clarifies how long you have to work at it. So that helps with stress as well. Should I be doing base? Should I be doing bleh? Again, the further you are away from your goal, the more general your training can be, and the more base work you do need to be doing. Frankly, if it's really cold out right now for you guys, as it is for me, I'm not going to do any buoy turn practice right now. I'm going to save all of my buoy turn practice work for spring and summer. And right now, that time is better spent doing something else because I don't want to fall in that much. And that element of time, I know that my next race that includes buoy turns is X many months away. I don't need to practice them now, and they get my heart rate up anyway, as I had mentioned. I'm going to put them somewhere in that anaerobic, that 20% peaking phase as part of an interval. So if we have time at the end, we will get into more specifics of the actual technique of the buoy turns, because I know a lot of people had questions about those, but I don't practice goofy side turns anymore. So people ask me about turning to the onside versus the offside. And I practice and I practice and I trained both ways, and I set aside a month to work on my offside turn, and it wasn't any faster. Not only was it not any faster than doing a nose draw from my dominant side, it felt less stable. So for me, I always step back with my right foot, whether I'm turning left or turning right. I just use my blade articulation skills, which is a fancy way to say my paddle strokes. And that's how I turn the board. And personally, taking a step back like that, not learning goofy side turns isn't a lack of progress. That's wisdom, to know when to not push it and when to use that time for something that is just a little bit more useful. So, as we said, get specific with your training as you near your goal. Another question you guys sent over: is there anything special you do to train for rough water paddling? Yes, I seek out and I train. This is a very old photo, by the way. I seek out and I train in very rough water. I make special trips, like I had mentioned before, something you can do to overcome certain obstacles. If there's a certain race with a certain kind of condition of water, the special thing you might want to do to train is to take a long weekend or two, do training camps, and go train in those kind of conditions. You guys also asked, do you treat training for long distance races differently than training for sprints? This is where it's going to get fun. So your pre-season and off-season skills, you develop things like discipline and focus, as well as your aerobic capacity and your strength that we talked about. All of that is the same. So like your multi-year training, kind of like those just generic good skills. I do breath work when I'm in the car, or I work on discipline, focus, calm reactions, moving on when things aren't going my way. All of that stays the same. And then the strength work, maximum strength phase, and the aerobic capacity development remain the same regardless of the length of the race. It turns out that your aerobic system is responsible for shuttling away lactate, and that's what enables your anaerobic system to work more efficiently. Even if you want to be a sprinter, you need very, very good aerobic capacity. You've got to have that slow work regardless. Not to mention that maximum strength work in the gym, it's equally important for both. In sprinting, you want your maximal strength work for, I mentioned before, that neural recruitment And in distance, you want that strength work because you want the strong neuromuscular, a strong musculoskeletal system to prevent injury. So where those two kind of diverge, a long distance race versus a sprint, where the training for those two diverge is pretty much in the peaking phase, when you ramp up that intensity and decrease that overall volume in that 20% of time. And no one asked, but I can't really move on without talking about intention. So for every training session, you need to know exactly what it is you are trying to accomplish. So before you go out for any paddle, for any run, for any strength session, take a minute and get in the right mindset. Focus on what it is you're trying to achieve. Set even a goal just for that session. It doesn't matter. Like this session, I'm walking the board for buoy turns. And when you get back, write down that you did it or that you didn't do it, or write some way that you can improve. We're going to look at our goal papers. Did anybody notice that while we were talking about the goal that you wrote on the paper, did anybody see the Easter egg that I hid for you guys in talking about our paddle goal? If anybody wants to like shout it, I can't even look at I can't see chat from presenter view, so which is actually really sad. Anyway,
I didn't see it.
Oh, you can?
No, I did not see the Easter egg.
Okay, so the Easter egg, when we talked about the goals, we said first they were specific, and then we said they were measurable. We picked a way to measure them. We talked about whether or not they were achievable. We talked about if they were realistic, and then I had you guys select the time. So I'm sure everyone's heard about SMART goals. If your goal is SMART and you are ready to race. So we talked about the long game. We talked about training across multiple years, and even when you're forced off the water, how to stay in that right mindset and just how to stay disciplined, focused, generally kind of adapt and cultivate our responses and the way we handle things in day-to-day life and how that actually impacts our paddling performance. We talked about, kind of best practices to structure that year of training. And now I'm sure I hear you guys are a big racing group, so we're going to talk about racing. Yep, more questions. So really quick before we move on, those goals, I just want to say that it doesn't matter. So that SMART goal that you selected, it doesn't matter how big or small that goal is. Small SMART goals matter too. So if you're in a smaller local race, you can make some quantitative or some qualitative goals for that race, just like you can make some quantitative or qualitative goals for a training session. You can test out, see how your race strategy is coming along. You can try to maintain a certain pace for a certain amount of time during a race. You can try to catch or drop a draft train. Those are small goals that are specific. They are measurable. You either grabbed the train or you didn't. It's achievable depending on what train you choose. It is realistic and it's time-based. It's happening right now in the race that I'm in or you're in. Whatever the goal is, like I said, whether you achieved it or not. And if you didn't, no matter how big or small, come back to the drawing board when it's over at the end of the SMART process. If you didn't get there, how can you approach your training in the future? What can you do to make it more achievable, to make it more realistic? How long do you need to work at it before it becomes a realistic and achievable goal? So, and if your big goal that you wrote down at the beginning of all of this is an event and it is time to get after it and just leave nothing on the table, just go for it. Here we go with some questions that you guys asked for race times. Okay, race strategy. How do you determine yours and what are the best practices? Something I love to do, I love to look at the past races. If this is not a first time race, I look at its historical data on their website and I check for high performers. I check for top times. I check for the slowest years. And if any of those high performers might be returning for the year that I'm going to be there. I also analyze the racing strategy of who I assume to be my main competition. So, you know, if somebody's a fast starter, if they're like a really good slow twitch athlete and they're really good at leading the train versus someone who has a good finish, I look back at that person's past races and I kind of determine what I think their strategy is going to be. I look at the historical weather conditions of that race. Sometimes the same race can be extremely choppy and then the next year be glassy flat. That's going to change the finish times of the races and it's going to change who's going to kind of reign supreme on that day as well. So I always check that because in the days around that race. So not just the day of the race, but maybe like a week before, a week or two before, and a week or two after, because any weather that's happening in that window, it's very likely that it could happen on race day. And from all of that data, I formulate a race plan, and then I stick to that plan. However, I'm also definitely flexible with that plan. So you try to stick to your plan within reason, but if something major happens and it doesn't go your way, don't worry. In your base season, you've been cultivating that don't worry about it mentality, and you're just gonna roll with the punches and just keep moving. So you guys asked what different stroke techniques and gears I use. Off the line, I go for the long and strong. I'm trying to take fewer strokes than anyone else, but move my boat or my board faster. This is a really fun mental game. So you can do this if you get really strong in the off season. So if you do the max strength phase and build the aerobic capacity really well, then instead of doing the fast, like panicky stroke, you're taking heavy strokes. It's like you're trying to pick up a 100-pound weight is what it feels like. So maximal neural recruitment, trying to keep your stroke rate freakishly low, but move the board with so much like flow that the people to your left and right are like, how the heck is this person going this fast at that stroke rate? It is an excellent mind game and it will screw with anybody else on your start line if you do it. So then when you need to accelerate your board or your boat quickly, you can use that sprint stroke. It's essentially just the catch only, and it's the catch with a body kip. And that stroke, I would use that for anything requiring a burst for 20 seconds or less. And that's also going to utilize that creatine phosphate system, that short burst energy. And you're going to recharge that actually. So you can use it. And after about 3 or 4 minutes, you can use that again. You can use that to screw with people. You can use that to drop a train. You can use that to catch a train. You can use that to catch a bump, a wave, or sprint at the very finish. But those short, choppy sprint strokes, they're not long-lived. For the bulk of the race, I'm gonna still use that long and strong, efficient stroke, but with less power than that max power stroke that I'm applying at the start. And back to if I want to screw with somebody kind of occasionally, I might drop into that max power stroke, but only for 4 to 5 minute intervals. And then I'll dial it back, let my body process some of those wastes. And then you can go back to it as often as you need, or depends on your training at that point, how many cycles of that, how many intervals of that you could accomplish. If I'm drafting, I'm really, really trying to keep it in that maximum aerobic function gear, which is just, it's right below my lactate threshold. If I can do that, like I'm hovering right at that in a draft train. If you happen to find yourself on a draft train and it feels like you're working too hard, you probably are. If it's causing you to be well above your lactate threshold, that pace isn't going to be sustainable. You're going to have to let that draft train go. You might even surprise yourself and find that you might be faster on your own, because sometimes if the person in front of you is too light, they're probably not even putting off a good draft anyway. And if they can't stay straight and their technique is sloppy, and you've worked on maximal power and efficiency, you can come out to the side, and again, you might even be faster. So have a little confidence and try that. And like I said, if you're going too hard, you're not gonna stay on there anyway. So you're better off not burning through all of your glycogen, not burning through all your fuel, and going it alone. You might even if they drop you at first, you might pass them again later just because of physiology. When it comes to transitioning from that initial stroke at the start of the race to mid-race, as soon as freaking possible. So the sooner the better. Don't go harder for any longer than you have to. Races, I learned the hard way, it's not about who races the hardest. Like, a race isn't the time to go show someone. It's not a time trial. Believe it or not. If it's a time trial, go do a time trial. A race is not a time trial. It's not how fast you can do it. Don't go hop on the course and show everybody how fast you can finish. It's about being smart, using the other racers, and making strategic moves. So no one remembers the person who went out hard at a blistering pace and like almost set a course record only to get passed at the end because they got drafted the whole time. They remember the person, well, nobody remembers anybody in stand-up racing anyway, but they remember the person that day that wins. They only get remembered for the one day. But don't race so hard, be like, look how fast I can go. And then, yeah, you're not gonna have anything at the end. So drop down to race pace ASAFP, and a lot of time when you go off the line and people are next to you, everyone's really vying for that whole shot, be it a buoy or some initial turn in the race. Sometimes not. But don't be in a hurry to be that person that gets the whole shot or takes the lead of the draft train. All you win by winning the initial race start sprint is a huge dose of pain pulling the draft train. Yes, if you wind up in that position, it's fine. You can set the pace. Someone's probably not going to like your pace. Slow it down insanely. If you're leading the train, slow down. Don't show everybody again how fast you can go. If you are not at the front of the train, that's just as fine. That's even better. Go as hard as you need to get on that draft, but once you're there, relax. If you're a fast twitch athlete, try not to lead the train. If you're a slow twitch athlete, you probably can use it to your advantage, but that's something we can talk about after the, in the questions, if anybody wants to get a little bit more into that. So whatever happens first, in that draft train, either you're leading or you fall in line, just immediately make sure you're dropping off that effort level. And if someone wants to take the lead, let them. So just try not to get too far back. My last request in ending this talk is to keep a training journal. I want everybody, a lot of people keep training logs. A log isn't going to do it. A log isn't going to help you reach your goals, the kind of SMART goals that we've talked about here today. A training journal is going to record everything about your training and your racing, all the way through from start to finish, from concept of goal to completion of goal. And then when you get there, you write how it felt, you write what you think about it. You can write about every training session. Today, I'm going to walk on my board so that I can buoy turn one day. today, yesterday, my buoy turn practice went poorly. I'm going to do this differently today. Have a conversation with yourself. Tell yourself at the end, when you recap your training or your race from today, say what you did good, say what you did bad, say what you're going to do tomorrow. And then tomorrow comes, read yesterday, and then write, what am I going to do today? And then when you get back, what did I do today? What did I do good? What did I do bad? What am I going to do tomorrow? And you essentially have this journal that you keep for the entire year. And I guarantee you, just that act alone is really going to help you achieve whatever that goal is that you guys wrote down at the start. And when you reach the goal, when it's over, you start the cycle all over again. You pick a new goal and you write a note, the date in your journal, and you write, new goal, achieved the old one, celebrate a little. Once you get there, take a couple days off, take a little time off, journal about the time off. Your body and mind will tell you when you're ready to get back to training. It will tell you when you're ready to get back on board. Definitely cultivate a sense of listening, deep listening to that. So when I take downtime to recharge, somebody asked about that. It looks like video editing. It looks like gardening. It looks like building a food forest. So that's what my downtime looks like. I'd love everybody to share in the comments what their downtime looks like. But I read a lot of books, and I find books on topics about things that are going to help me with my SMART goals: breath work, dehydrating food, gardening, map and compass. So anything. I actually just bought a book and an at-home suture practice kit, so that if I cut myself or something in the Yukon, I can give myself stitches. Thus this weird note. This is in my training journal: freezing rain in morning, or lifted in morning. I will practice sutures in the afternoon.
Anybody got a question?
Hey, April, I'd like to put a plug in for your Instagram. You had a couple of posts. Actually, you always have posts that are really thought-provoking. If you could share it with everyone, because if folks aren't following you already, then they should be. But what is your Instagram account?
I'm going to put it right there in the, hold on, everyone. I'll share at Instagram. I can do it in the comments. Yeah, it's just at April Zilg. Oh, I can see everybody's goals now. I'm so happy. I love it. Lots of gorge, lots of downwind. Sorry, I'm just catching up. I've been in presenter mode. It's awful in there. I didn't like it in there. All right. Anywho, does anybody have any questions? I don't want to keep anybody else up past their bedtimes, but I'm hopped up on dark chocolate espresso beans. So if anybody does have a question, I'm more than happy to answer.
I'd love to hear about what your favorite race was and where it was and why.
Oh goodness, that is actually really, really hard. It's hard because I really love downwind. And so just 2020, before the onset of COVID, I did my first Hawaiian downwind races, and those are pretty high up there. There's a special place in my heart for the gorge. And then there's just so many different aspects of races. My first 100-mile race was in 2019 too. And that was life-changing and special in its own right. I don't know. That's a really, really hard question. Sadly, I think Pacific Paddle Games / Battle of Paddle might be my favorite race of all time. So it doesn't exist anymore. Even though I suck at that race really bad, I never placed really high. Oh man, I ate it. I biffed it so much. Doesn't mean I didn't love the race. It's my favorite race that I'm horrible at. So that one. Because I think for stand-up, I personally think that more technical racing is a little bit more exciting because of the balance aspect of it. If you want to go fast and straight, I'd say pick a faster craft like a surf ski or an outrigger canoe or something that likes to go straight and fast.
Hey, April, you speaking of Instagram, you had a post that kind of changed my trajectory last summer. I think I'd overtrained, and about the time I was beginning to wonder what the heck was going on with me in the summertime, you had this post about your overtraining, it was actually a series of posts which are really good. So folks who are looking at your Instagram should dial way back into the summertime because you had a lot of really good stuff. Well, even before then. But anyway, so I read the big book of endurance races, and I know a couple other folks have. It was really good. And I think Matt Jones, maybe. He's a local paddler here now, but was an East Coast guy back in the day. Anyways, he does some coaching here, so he gave me some really good stuff, and it helped a lot actually. So I've been working on some of the things you were talking about here. We just recently had our first race in a very long time, which is pretty awesome. Rob Casey put it on. And, yeah, it was super cool. And so it was really interesting. I'm just curious for your thoughts on this. I've been training to that 180, minus your age, which is pretty shortly going to get to be an even lower heart rate here. Yeah. With some really scheduled sort of peaks and valleys, and it was going well, and it has been going well. But in the race we just did, it was like I pinned for 8 miles straight. The interesting thing is that I actually had a really good result for me. I mean, I went faster than I normally ever would have been able to before. I'm curious if that's something that we should expect to see if we're following some of your tenets.
Yeah, and that's actually fine. And what you're doing when you're doing the aerobic work. So it sounds like genetically you might be more of a fast twitch muscle fiber athlete. That doesn't mean that your type 2 intermediary fibers aren't slower twitch adapted, but that your body burns hot. It's going to burn a lot of fuel. It's going to burn a lot of glycogen really quickly. Fast twitch fiber athletes tend to be genetically better at clearing. Sorry, you jumped on my screen. I'm looking at this little square of you while I'm talking, and you moved. I'm like, where did he go?
I'm sorry, I'll try to hold still from now on. It's my fast twitch fibers that made me do it.
Okay, I know. That was really fast. That was the fastest twitch ever. So what happens is fast twitch athletes are really good at clearing lactate. So what happens is you go really hard, and you're not necessarily good at it too naturally. By taking the time to train your aerobic capacity and train your aerobic system, if you look now at the training for the uphill athlete, the best graphic I've ever seen to describe it is they drew your muscle fibers as a vacuum cleaner. And so your slow twitch aerobic muscles or your aerobic system is like a vacuum cleaner that sucks out like lactate, pyruvate, like all of that. And the bigger your vacuum, the longer and harder you can go. For you, as long as it's okay that your heart rate was really high during that race, as long as when you come back to training, you go back to that maffetone, that maximum aerobic function heart rate. You don't want to come back from that and train at that intensity again. Go back to that 80-20 principle and keep developing and keep that aerobic capacity strong. Fast twitch athletes do have a tendency to overtrain very easily because you literally, you look at your paddleboard and your heart rate is above the right zone. It's like you feel like you can't even take 4 strokes and you're already out of your aerobic zone. You're like, what the hell is going on? That's very normal for that body type, that morphotype, and don't stress about it. Just it seems like you're not doing much in training. It doesn't feel like you're moving a lot. It doesn't feel like you're working very hard, but you're building a big vacuum cleaner, a big vacuum cleaner, so that when you do that race, it sucks up all the waste from your anaerobic fibers. And the bigger your vacuum, the harder you can go, and the more it sucks all the waste away, and the longer you can race at that intensity. So I absolutely would expect your heart rate to be pinned, and that's fine, as long as you're not doing that too frequently. Fast twitch athletes can only also do that for probably maximum 3 weekends of racing before you really do need to take a break. A slow twitch athlete, because it's not metabolically the same race for them, they can probably do that 4 or 5 weeks in a row, and they'd still be fast in weeks 6 and 7. But that's okay. You just got to pick and choose your battles,
Thanks.
April, it's Lisa Ryder. I'm curious if you would share a few of your personal goals with us for the upcoming year.
Oh, goodness. Okay. So they are written way up there. So you can't see them. I painted my entire office wall as a dry erase board so I can see all of my goals. And this is my schedule for my entire week. So if they hold the Carolina Cup, I will be attending the Carolina Cup. I would love to have my first Molo Solo, Molokai Crossing in the OC1. Those races, however, are late April, early May. And if they do not run, I've blocked off the entire week between them. And I've mapped a route from the lake where close to where I currently live. And I'm pretty sure I can paddle all the way from this lake to Cape Hatteras Lighthouse, which is about 780 miles. So I'm going to take that week and I'm going to pack all of my own food. So I'm starting a garden outside. My goal is to grow my own food. It probably won't be done by April, but some of it, grow at least part of it. I'm going to grow my own food, put it in my dehydrator, dehydrate my own food, and pack it and paddle all the way to Cape Hatteras camping, fully self-supported from literally the ground up would be my number one goal for the year. After that, I don't think they're gonna, sadly, I do not think they're gonna run the Yukon 1000. We find that out in March. Jen and I are talking about maybe, because the race is a little wonky, the way they're doing things, and we might ask for the refund and go and paddle the Yukon on our own and do all the way from the start of the race. We'd do a source to sea, which would be over 2,000 miles. And so the road to Yukon would end with the full Yukon River, not just 1,000 miles of it. So we're still talking about that, but that would be a very huge undertaking. There was a woman who already did it. She did it solo. And I think it only took her, she floated. She floated and she finished in 65 days. So I think we could probably finish in a month or less. But again, that's to be determined. APP World Tour has announced a tour for 2021. We'll see how many of the dates actually go, but I will compete in that. And depending on what other races show up or don't, I might be going for it for APP World Tour, World Champion title thing. I don't know, maybe. But that actually works perfectly with, if I build tons of aerobic, if I build my big vacuum cleaner with my long paddle all the way to Cape Hatteras, and a couple other really long paddles. Jen called the other day and actually said she signed up, she put her name on the wait list for the Alabama 650, which I supported for her last year when I was kind of recovering from my aerobic deficiency syndrome, which a big key component of that, my blood tests, when they came back, my white blood cell count was really low. So that was kind of another thing that cued me in. So I skipped that race. I didn't participate. I was her pit crew instead. She's got her name on the wait list, and she said she was going to surprise me by having me do the race and her being my pit crew. So we'll see if that happens as well. I didn't sign up, but it's a maybe.
Well, if no one else has another question for you, I have one more. I'm curious how you got your nickname, the Vanilla Gorilla.
Oh, this is actually really fun. So we were Carolina Paddleboard Company where I was working when I got back from India, and we're measuring people for paddles, and the common kind of method at the time was either like a shaka or a certain number of inches over the head. So if you looked at Quick Blade's website or any paddle manufacturer website, they gave you a generic for your height plus certain inches overhead is how high you needed to cut your paddle. And they cut my paddle. I'm like, no, this is totally wrong. This is awful. And then they cut my paddle again. And I'm like, no, guys, like we keep getting this wrong. What's going on? So we figured out finally that it was arm span. So we went around the shop and we measured everybody's heights and arm spans. And most human beings, all of you guys included, your arm span is approximately equal to your height, plus or minus 1 inch of standard deviation. My arms were 5 3/4 inches longer than I am tall. And so the joke was that my knuckles drag the ground when I walk. Therefore, I am the vanilla gorilla. They are very long. They are very
That
long.
must be helpful to be. That must be helpful to be a good paddler, to have such long arms.
It actually helps a lot more in the outrigger canoe than it does on the stand-up for some reason, but I don't know what it is about like the angles, but the reach is much better in the canoe. It was horrible in grade school, middle school, high school, when the rule for girls was that you had to wear shorts in the summer that they were like, 3 inches longer than the tip of your fingers. So the only shorts I could wear were boys' shorts. And for, entire grade school, everybody thought I was a lesbian, which was fine. I didn't mind. I mean, I wasn't, but I was like, whatever. Because I just wore boy shorts for years and years. And I'm like, guys, it's just my arms. Anyway, I couldn't wear girl shorts. True story.
Hey, April, I'm curious about your thoughts on just stand-up paddle racing in general. I mean, especially the sort of the professional scene, but the big races. We've got, I think we're really lucky in Seattle, a pretty good scene. We've got, when there isn't COVID, 2 races a week that are fairly well attended, including the Elks ones, the folks you're talking to here, which is, I don't know, typically 20 to 30 people on the start line. But then you see some of the bigger races, like you were talking about Battle of the Paddle and so forth. What's your experience as a professional paddler? Because I know you guys are getting squeezed a bit. What's the way forward? And how can we help? Maybe is a better question. I mean, we talk about it all the time. How do we maybe think about having a big race here or something like that?
So, I mean, it depends on like who's your target market, right? I think there's huge value in the APP tour, like a pro tour. When I was starting out paddling, I didn't even think that was something I could ever attain. But it gave me this thing to kind of work towards every year. I think that the local races, when you get a pro to show up, and you line up on the same race start line as Danny Ching. And for me, back in the day, it was like same line as Candace and Annabelle. There's something special about that. But there's also something really special about a pro tour that does set that apart. It does add a level of professionalism to our sport as a whole. In terms of local races, I don't think they're going anywhere. And if you want more people, I think keep the entry fee really low and celebrate all the paddlers, celebrate every level, celebrate the beginners, you celebrate everyone. And that's something that the Carolina Cup has traditionally done really well, and the Wrightsville Beach Paddle Club, not the low price part, but the celebrate everybody part. Their prices are batshit. But, so racing as a whole, I think we're fine. And I actually think that COVID and what we've seen in board sales is I'm very optimistic that a lot of people, because paddling is a very socially distant activity, a lot of people were forced out of gyms. They had a little extra money on the weekend, or, money every month. So they bought a paddleboard. I think we're going to see a big surge in the rec races, in the beginner paddlers. And we, as existing paddlers in the industry, we need to do everything that we can to make them all feel welcome, to share our initial blunders or anything. Like, we need to celebrate them, make them feel welcome, help them, guide them the way that we all did when the sport was just starting out. I know there's a couple people here in this Zoom right now that are like in the founders of the sport, right? Like, they've been around since the very beginning. You guys know better than anybody just how to take someone's hand and say, yeah, you suck now, but you'll be good later. Like, just enter the race. You're going to be fine. So that's our duty right now as paddlers, no matter what level you're at, is helping all of this new influx of paddlers. I think we're going to see a big boost. So find somebody who picked up a board during COVID and make sure they sign up for a stinking race. Yeah, I hope everybody got a little something out of it. Definitely set your goals. I'm gonna.
That's the number one thing.
All right.
This is great. Thank you.
No worries.
Thank
Dude, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
having me
Thank you,
be
April.
your speaker. Like I
Thank you,
said, it
April.
was definitely an honor. I love being asked to talk and not shut up. I love it.
Knock 'em dead in the tour.
That's right. Have a good year. Yeah.
Yay.
We'll be watching you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sweet.
See you,
All right.
everybody.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Great.
Bye. I gotta find out how to save this chat.
Bye.
Oh.